has started,
I see that
so
now. Yep.
we're all set to go, and I'm going to turn it over to Mark.
All right, I'm going
And
to share my screen.
I do appreciate Mark being here to talk with us this evening. I'll be around afterwards if you have questions for anything not related to the webinar. I'll be glad to answer those. But Let's ask DMR questions first, and if you have section type questions, I'll be glad to answer those as best as I can, or at least to write them down and get back to you with an answer. I'm going to mute my screen, turn off my camera,
All
and
right.
let Mark take it from here.
And let me check with you though, Georgia. You're seeing my screen okay? Just wanted to be sure my screen sharing was making it on all right. Hopefully it is.
Yeah, I
So
had
I
to
guess
unmute myself so I could tell you. Yeah,
okay,
you're
good.
here.
It's
You're
there.
in good
Good.
shape.
All right. So to continue a little bit, elaborate on what George mentioned. So really, first question I like to know whenever I've got a presenter in front of me is, so who the heck am I to be doing this DMR session? So a little bit of my background. 4 years ago, this month, I got my first DMR device. It was a DV4 Mini USB stick device that you plug into the side of a Windows computer. And at the time, I was traveling frequently to Southern California. And another ham here back east and I finally succeeded in talking coast to coast with me on a DMR repeater in the Papa system of Southern California. Papa is actually the name of one of the repeater clubs in Southern California. And he was on a V4 Mini. It took us a while. We figured out a talk group and were able to go from there. It worked. But it didn't take long for us to realize the DV4 Mini had major limitations. And I graduated to a Shark RF open spot. And since then, and again, we're talking 2016, I've built my own Raspberry Pi 3 based DV Mega hotspot, purchased 4 Pi Zero Zoom spots or Orange Pi, or there's a lot of different names for them, jumbo spots, etc., and set up at least 10 more for other hams. That same year, in the last week of December of 2016, I started the PA DMR net for Tuesday nights at 8 p.m. One of our net controls is here tonight, and that's Robert, K0PB. Thanks for attending. And it continues to this day. So how do we facilitate, where did this material come from, and what is a procedure for questions during a webinar? The contents of this webinar really are based primarily on the questions that I hear asked on the air every week and in the gatherings of hams that, well, hams that I used to attend gatherings, not quite so much anymore. Still doing local club meetings in person now, but I'm not going to as many meetings as I used to. But my point here is that because I'm using things that I hear on the air, there's a very good chance that your question is going to appear in my presentation here in the webinar. So permit me to address all of the info that's on my slides. We'll get through that. And I have allotted time at the end for additional questions. And to help facilitate your questions, you're going to notice a number in the lower right corner of every slide. You can see my arrow down there on it. And that's the slide number. And if it helps, you can use it for reference during the Q&A at the end of the session, if it helps you and everyone else to better understand your question. So without further, let's get right into it. What we are going to address are things, these topics, not exclusively, but mainly why DMR, the cost of entry to DMR. We'll do an overview of code plugs and what's in them. Not going to go into the detail too much about how to make a code plug. In fact, not at all. But we will talk about importing or adapting existing code plugs, which is really the best way to start. Also, we'll detail using your DMR radio, and I find a lot of people get tripped up by that. And we'll talk, I'll show you some graphics and things about the difference made by a good display screen on a DMR radio. It's kind of important. Good practices for on-air operation. We'll talk about hotspots versus repeaters, talk groups, making them work, and especially important, where to look for more information and qualified information at that. I like to, there's a lot of stuff out there, as many of you know, and a lot of it on YouTube is, and on other sources, not quite fully baked, if to be polite, if I can be diplomatic for a moment. So I try to find sources that are good, solid sources, and you'll see more of those. And as I mentioned, we will have questions and answers with time allotted at the end of the webinar for that. I do not intend to address in this webinar details of programming and code plug creation. There's better ways to do that than a webinar, although that might be a future one. I do not want to try to cover the many vendor variations in the customer programming software. If you've been around DMR a little while, it doesn't take long to realize that, oh, well, my Alinco programming software does it this way, but you've got to connect systems and look, they call it this and do it that way. Yeah, it's different. And there's bunches of differences going from one vendor to the next. Also, I don't want to really endorse or recommend specific radios or hotspots. You'll hear me make reference to them for the purposes of illustration, but I'm not saying that one's better than another. And I don't want to get into detailing repeaters around Pennsylvania or elsewhere with regard to their coverage, what talk groups are available, etc. There's ways to find that out, and it's kind of out of the scope of the webinar here. So first and foremost, there are lots of digital voice modes in amateur radio. Why then DMR? So what do we have out there? Well, of course, you're all familiar with one of the early entries was D-Star, and that's primarily in the ICOM and Kenwood manufacturing, and not proprietary per se, but it is promulgated by primarily ICOM, and Kenwood offers radios with it for amateur use as well. Yaesu System Fusion, and that is definitely a proprietary protocol that's offered by the Yaesu radios and is exclusive to Yaesu. The P25 standard was going to be the answer to interoperability in land mobile radio systems. There are a number of vendors available that support P25, and around in certain parts of the country, there are P25 amateur radio networks. Equipment from Motorola, Tate, ICOM, Kenwood, Hytera, EF Johnson. The one hallmark of the P25 stuff, where it does exist, it tends to be pretty expensive if you're going out to acquire P25, and I don't know of many large P25 systems in Pennsylvania. They tend to be around the metropolitan areas in the United States, and that's typically when somebody has access to a large pool of land mobile radio equipment that is P25 capable. And then, of course, there's NXDN, which is a proprietary standard from Kenwood, and also ICOM offers land mobile or Part 90 commercial radios for that. And again, there are some ham radio implementations of NXDN. But as you'll see, there's a big gap in my slide. And what is missing there? Well, I'm going to bring it in. And it's DMR. DMR stands for Digital Mobile Radio. And it's not a proprietary protocol. A lot of people think, oh, it's a Motorola thing. Well, there are proprietary implementations of DMR. Motorola calls them Moto Turbo and Connect Plus. But the basic DMR codecs and programming and source codes and so on are open source. And that means a lot of manufacturers can offer radios. And I listed a few there, and you're familiar with Alinco. They're probably, I think, the only Japanese manufacturer that's in there. But Anytone, BTEC, Connect Systems, Motorola, Woshun, Pofeng, Hytera, Islands, Retevis, pretty much the same. And there's more. There's just gobs and gobs, batches and batches of manufacturers making DMR equipment. Kind of important to know, though, that all of those voice modes that I described above are only compatible with radios using the same mode. We'll talk about cross-mode operation later in the webinar, because there is a way to get from DMR into those other digital systems. But there is no direct interoperability across modes. So if you have a DMR radio, it's not going to do P25. Likewise, if you get a D-Star radio, it's not going to operate on Yaesu System Fusion. And kind of important to realize that. I find that's a common misconception. People read the advertising and it'll say things like, oh, this is the best digital voice mode that's available, and you can get this in this radio from XYZ manufacturer. And they get it and they think, oh, good, I've got a digital radio, now I can do DMR. Unless it said it was DMR, that's not what it's going to do. So you have to be very careful when you're selecting things. Also, sometimes confusion comes up. There are repeaters that offer both digital and analog capability. As a matter of fact, most of them do. Hytera, Motorola, the administrator of a repeater can say, hey, I've got a DMR repeater, but I'm going to allow people to use it in an analog mode. And it'll go back and forth. Typically, it will prefer the digital mode. So if somebody comes in digital, they're going to take over any analog conversation or regular FM that might have been in progress. And a limitation is that when you give up or use the analog mode, you're giving up the wide area voice network and the gateway that's available in the DMR mode, So something to be aware of when you see a repeater as showing being dual mode, or you'll see it listed as a DMR repeater, but then you'll see a PL code or CTCSS to activate it. And you think, huh, why is that? Well, it's probably because it's a dual mode repeater. And there's a good number of those out around Pennsylvania. Another question that comes up and I see and hear all the time is why is the cost of entry to DMR lower than other ham radio digital voice modes? It's a good question. And when you start to explore a little bit, you have to look at what the history of DMR is. DMR, or digital mobile radio, it really, at its heart, is a commercial and public safety radio system that has been adapted for amateur radio use by hams. It's designed for land mobile, public safety radio. It was absolutely not purpose-built for ham radio. And D-Star and Yaesu System Fusion, those are ham radio protocols. They were made for hams and with hams in mind. DMR was not. DMR, the hams got together, especially the Motorola group, the DMR Mark, years ago, and they said, hey, you know what? We can take this DMR thing and turn it into a ham radio protocol. It reminds me, and some of you, I think a lot of you are probably have been in ham radio long enough to remember the late 1960s and the early 70s. The way you got on the air with 2-meter FM, you went out and got yourself a repurposed piece of commercial radio gear, a Motorola rig, GE, some of the others that were out there, EF Johnson, and you retuned it, put new crystals into it, and boom, you're on 2 meters FM. You had to adapt the radio that was designed for commercial use to ham radio. It's kind of like that with DMR. That unfortunately makes the learning curve slightly steeper. And in case you have thought you're going to get away without using a computer and you're going to program your radio with a keypad, let me disabuse you of that idea right now. You really, really, really want to commit to using a computer to operating your radio and programming it. It is the best way to keep it current and interact with the radio when you want to make changes. Anyway, all of these factors have created a widespread availability, multiple radios from multiple manufacturers. And an important note here I noted was these are dual band radios, handheld and mobile. That is very unusual in the commercial world. A lot of the commercial rigs that are out there, the Motorola, the Hyteras, the others that are Tate, for example, they are single band radios. Most of the time, your land mobile radio users, your public safety users, they have no need whatsoever for dual band. Their license says, look, you've got an allocation, it's 470 point whatever megahertz, and that's it. Why do you need to go down to 146 megahertz? Hams are fairly unique in their quest and usage of dual band stuff, handheld and mobile. So one of the things that's come about in the low cost and radios is this dual band capability, a great boon actually to the amateur stuff. The other answer to the question is just follow the money. So think about it for a moment. If you're a manufacturer and you look at what are we going to build to, and you decide to target the ham radio market, that is unfortunately, very small and very limited market. But if you can make a radio that can be used not only for amateur radio, but also can be certified for use as a Part 90 FCC accepted or European standard accepted for LMR, land mobile radio, or public safety radio. Gosh, that kind of makes your potential sales much, much bigger. So hams benefit from the increased market penetration. that comes down to lower cost for a radio that can be used in the ham radio service. And that's the bottom line of when I say follow the money. That's why DMR is such less cost. The other thing to keep in mind too is D-Star and YSF, as I mentioned earlier, those are proprietary ham radio protocols. They are very unlikely to be purchased for use by public safety and commercial users. So again, they have self-selected to limit their audience of potential sales to the amateur market. DMR covers a lot of territory and a lot of different kinds of users. All right, so you're thinking, wow, this is really bad. We have to do extra learning because I'm a ham and I'm using DMR, I'm using a commercial system. Good news here is that some of the DMR manufacturers have begun adding ham-related features, and they make a big deal out of it. Examples would be Anytone, Alinco, and even the Alliance, or Alliance, as some say, the Retevis radios, Retevis. They do tend to put some ham features in there that will be accessible from the keypad and maybe a little simpler. So there is hope for your low-cost radio that maybe you won't have to learn about how to run all those P1, P2, P3, P4 keys that are on the front panel of your commercial radio that you are now using for ham radio stuff. All right, another one I hear all the time. What's a code plug? Yeah, very simply, it's just another word for a radio configuration. Some guidance on code plugs in general. Trying to build your own code plug from scratch, it's really difficult and it's prone to errors. Even if you don't find it difficult, it's easy to make a mistake because what you're doing basically is putting in the same frequencies for, let's say, a given repeater over and over and over again, but each time you're changing the talk group or contact, and then when you switch to the next repeater, you might be changing the color code, and we'll talk about those in a moment. So each of those changes, trying to do it building from the ground up is tough. The base requirements of the DMR, let's call it a channel for a moment, although from here on out I'll probably refer to it as a talk group. The variations in the programming software, the CPS, as you'll hear it referred to, that's the generic word. CPS is kind of like tissue is to Kleenex. It just means anybody's customer programming software. For various radios mean that somebody else's experience in building a code plug isn't necessarily going to apply to your radio's software. And I'll talk in a couple more slides here about, so what if somebody gives you a code plug that's not for your radio? Is the way that you can transform it? And the answer is yes, sometimes. So we'll come back to how to modify code plugs. But bottom line is, if you can, it's really best to start with a code plug that was created not only for your radio, but also your location. Location is kind of important with code plugs, especially if you're a mobile ham or use an HT or go from one location to another or visit relatives or whatever. So where do you get these things? Good place to start is a local club. Hopefully your club has an interest in DMR. There are websites that offer pre-built code plugs, a good number of them actually in Pennsylvania. And I'll show you those lists. They're near the, just before Q&A. And also fellow hams who you have heard have a code plug or are speaking of it. And again, you sort of have to use them with caution because they don't all apply and so you need to do some transformations once in a while. We'll get into more of those details in a moment. The elements needed in each DMR channel, and this is the thing that probably threw me the most 4 years ago when I started programming and looking at my first code plug, was I thought, well, wait a minute, I just put in a single DMR repeater here. Can I just punch up what I want to do from the keypad for each manual dialed up code plug talk group? Yeah, you can do that. It is much, much simpler, however, to put that same repeater's frequency pair in multiple times. And then all you got to do is dial it up on the radio. So you can quickly switch, let's say, from PA statewide over to Western PA or Northeast PA or the EPA channel or talk group by just turning a knob. So this essential elements in each DMR channel that you create in a code plug are, first of all, obviously the frequencies. If it's a repeater, you'll have an input and output frequency, just like you used to use on any other FM system. But a hotspot's a little of a weird bird because everything is done on the same frequency. and we'll talk more about repeaters versus hotspots in a moment, you'll need a color code. And I would draw an analogy to say that it's very similar to PL or CTCSS, the continuously tone-coded squelch system that is the subaudible tone. Kind of like that. All it does is causes the repeater or other receivers to recognize that, oh yeah, you belong to this system. And it also helps keep stations from stepping on each other. DMR is somewhat unique in that it has 2 time slots. They typically are referred to as time slot 1 or time slot 2. And it means that a single channel for DMR can be broken into two conversational or QSO streams. None of the other protocols do that. So DMR within its 12.5 kilohertz bandwidth can split into 2 separate time slots and carry on separate conversations on the same frequency at the same time on the same repeater. So that's kind of an interesting advantage to get a little more duty cycle or operational conversations and QSOs going on. You do have to have in every DMR channel a specific talk group, and talk groups are kind of equated to contacts. You'll find that your DMR ID is actually can be used as a talk group number. So, for example, a lot of you started early with DMR in Pennsylvania. You got a number that began 3142 and then had 3 digits after it. That's your unique contact number, your DMR ID for you. But talk groups also begin with that 3142, and there might be 31421. That's the PA or Pennsylvania talk around channel. There are more than 1,000 talk groups available, and that's just on one of the voice networks known as Brandmeister. There are places where these talk groups intersect with each other, and we'll talk more about talk groups in a few minutes. But so some of the other voice networks also carry the same talk groups. For example, PA statewide, 3142, it is carried on I think all of the major voice networks. Some of the more less used or fringe type talk groups may not be carried on every system. And then finally, after you have all these other things, a frequency, a color code, a time slot, a talk group or contact, you have to assign in the code plug the channel or talk group to a zone. You have to do that or it's going to not show up at all in the radio. So zones are a necessary thing, and I would draw the analogy and say they're kind of like memory banks of channels in a scanner or a memory set you'd find in somebody asking for a radio check on PA State. I turn off my DMR radio, pardon me. Okay, back to it there. And so a zone is just a way to collect channels or talk groups together in a way that are useful to you. We'll talk about those in a little bit more. In fact, what then, people say, what should be in my radio's code plug? If I take a code plug from somebody else or accept one and they give it to me, what should be in there? Or could I change it? And if I change it, what do I put in? Well, as I mentioned, they are groups of channels or groups of talk groups that you can organize. So you have to think about, where do you operate? Do you travel? Do you do mobile operation in an area of the state or maybe multiple states? Sometimes there's purposes to be considered. For example, you might have 2 or 3 local repeaters, if you're lucky, that are DMR, or maybe your analog repeaters, which is fine to put those in the code plug as well. You may have a hotspot. You might have a hotspot, in fact, in your home. You might have one in your vehicle. That needs a separate zone so that you're on the right frequency for the hotspot. You may have club events. I know our club, we have channels, frequencies that we use, both DMR as well as analog, for particular events that we do in the field when we're out, when we go out the next time. Not sure when that'll be next, but I know a lot of clubs have their own operational channels. ARES, the Amateur Radio Emergency Service. There are a whole slew of frequencies available in typically the section plans for ARES. That's another good creation of a zone, and designated zone as ARES. And DMR and analog FM channels can be in the same zone. Oftentimes I see people create code plugs, and I don't know if they do it out of just the way they want to put the things together, or if it's they think that they need to separate analog FM from the DMR or digital channels, you can combine them in the same zone. To me, if it makes sense to put them in the same zone, let's say by location, I have, for example, one of my zones is, I call it the Wayne County zone, and I've got multiple repeaters in there that are both FM and DMR. And that's nice, it's handy, because if I'm mobile, I hit the scan button and I can scan through both DMR and analog at the same time. So yes, you can do that. Multiple types of channels in the same zone. All right, something that's not used probably nearly as much as it should be, although it's hard to tell how much, and it's called the Parrot. And the Parrot, you probably have seen in many listings. It is the talk group 9990 or contact 9990. What it does is when you transmit, it records your audio transmission and then plays it back to you about 5 seconds after your transmission ends. Well, the audio itself traverses the entire DMR voice network, the global voice network, goes upstream to your server that you've designated in your code plug, or excuse me, in your hotspot, or that's been designated by the repeater owner. And about 5 seconds later, it replays the downstream voice, your transmission, back to you. Really is the best way to do a radio check, because you're sure that your signal is making it into the system and back. You immediately get feedback on your audio quality and the level. And it really is a good practice to talk to the Parrot instead of asking for a radio check on the air. If you're going to go on the air and want to talk to somebody, fire up just like you do on 2 meters and say, hey, KZ3MW, I'm on 3142 looking for a call. This is Kilo Zulu 3, Mike Whiskey. Anybody out there for a call today? Or But radio check is kind of, all right, you sort of wondered, gosh, am I going to get into a QSO here? Or is this a test? Or is it really just a radio check and he's going to be gone? Well, the Parrot gets rid of all of that. Kind of an important thing is the Parrot should be in a private, not a group call. Most everything you do in DMR uses group contacts or group calls. But in the case of the Parrot, almost all, there's one exception I can think of, you can do group Parrot calls to, I believe it's the Shark RF open spot. But normally you would use a private. So add it to your code plug. Be sure it's in there. Ask the person who's creating it, or if you're not doing it yourself. And any repeater that supports the Parrot will be useful for that, because it's a good way to check to see if you're getting into a repeater. You can key up the Parrot. Nobody else hears it normally because it's a private call. Not that it can't be heard, but it's just not interrupting other people's radios. And also, I mentioned that the normal Parrot goes out to the DMR voice network, goes to a server, and comes back to you. It traverses the entire network. Well, the Shark RF open spot, those hotspots, they also have a local Parrot function, and I believe it's 9998 is the talk group. You have to check me on that. It's in their instructions. But it actually records your voice locally on your open spot rather than sending it out over the network. Again, it's just another way to do a quick check of what your audio quality and signal quality is, but in this case, into your own open spot from Shark RF. All right, I promised a few slides back to answer the question of, can I import or adapt a code plug from one radio to another? This happens a lot. Happens with your own equipment. I started out with an MD380 from TYT. And then I got a GD77 Radiodity, and the next thing I had an Anytone, and all the time I was looking at the question of, can I take what I had in my code plug before and use it in the other radio? And or somebody gives you one, or you download one from one of the sources, which there's multiple, and we'll talk about those in the web links a little bit later. So can you use a code plug from one radio to another? The answer, unfortunately, is sometimes. You have to sort of know which is going to work. Sometimes you can import and it will work. Very seldom you can actually directly apply the same code plug and make it useful between, for example, I think the Anytone mobile radio, the ATD 578, and the handhelds, the ATD 868 and 878, those code plugs are not directly compatible with each other. You would think that among a single manufacturer, you could just load up a code plug from the other manufacturer's radio. Unfortunately, it doesn't quite work that way, but they do have an import function. You have to look carefully at the file name extension on the code plug. You'll see things like RDB, radio database, RDT, which is radio data terminal or something, DAT. They use a lot of different things out there. And look at your code plug or your CPS, your customer programming software. There may be an export feature that'll allow you to bring the essentials out, all of those elements that I talked about earlier, the talk group, the contact, the color code, the frequencies. There may be a way to export that. A super useful utility, if you haven't used it, or you got to try this one out, it's shareware. You can contribute if you wish. I find it valuable, and I periodically contribute. And it's called the N0 GSG DMR Contact Manager. It's by Tom Wheeler, and no, he's no relation to me, so I'm not receiving any remuneration here. It's at this URL, n0gsg.com, Contact Manager. And it's pretty neat because it allows you to import or open up a code plug, a lot of them directly. Some exceptions, it won't do a .dat. That's pretty popular in the Radioddity radios. But a lot of the others that use RDP, RDT, boom, they open right up directly. And it will allow you to transform that data and copy the formatting of it into another radio's format, and then save it again and just boom, go ahead and use it. There's also a tremendous DMR contact info import. It goes right out to the source where you got your DMR ID, which is radioid.net, and you can specify how you want to download a certain number of DMR IDs. Some people want the whole world, and hey, if your memory's got room for 100,000 DMR contacts, then fine, go for it. I find that a little confusing. So for example, when I set up my DMR contact manager, I say, give me all the ham DMR IDs for Pennsylvania, Ohio, New York, New Jersey, and Maryland. I think I got it. I might have West Virginia. And that's 10,000 some plus DMR IDs at present. But it makes it very simple. You don't have to do playing around with spreadsheets and exporting from radio ID, et cetera. It's very direct. It accesses the database right straight away. All right, getting into using your DMR radio itself. This is kind of a lightning round of questions that I hear all the time. How can I tell if I'm getting into a repeater? Well, first and foremost, when you key up, when you release, well, if you have a talk permit tone and you have it set to be on in your code plug, you'll hear kind of a doo-doo come up when you press or push the talk button. And that usually is an indication that the repeater has heard you and is responding to your transmission. Another way is what I mentioned earlier. Check with the parrot. Go to the talk group that contains the parrot, dial that up in the radio for your repeater, and key up and transmit, KZ3MW testing or whatever your call is. 5 seconds later, you'll get a reply. The other thing to watch is look for, typically there's an LED indicator or a green light on your radio that after you key up, you will see come back an extended period of time. That's the squelch tail in a way, although you'll never hear the typical squelch tail on DMR. But you'll see that light on. Now, that'll tell you that, yeah, you keyed the repeater up. It doesn't necessarily tell you that you got into it cleanly. And we'll talk about bit error rate, packet loss in a few minutes. So what's it mean to get booped? Some of the radios that are out there, you'll key up and you'll see your red transmit light come on. And then after you release your push to talk, you'll hear boop. That means, nope, you did not make it into the repeater. Now, you're never going to hear that when you're using a hotspot, but repeaters, yeah, it's possible to get booped. You may see a message on the display too that'll say repeater not found or something along those lines. So that's another indication that, no, you're not making it. You probably need a better antenna. We'll talk about that in a minute. So here's another one I hear all the time. How come I'm seeing this green receive light, but I'm not hearing anything? So the receiver in my HT is picking up something, or my mobile rig, but I'm not hearing anything. Chances are what's going on there is you're on a repeater, and in the repeater's time slot, there are additional talk groups available, but you don't have that particular one programmed in your code plug. So it indicates that the channel is busy, but it's with a talk group that you haven't put in your code plug for whatever reason. It's not there. It either was an omission, an oversight, or maybe you deliberately do not want to be hearing Talk Group 91, which is Worldwide English, for example. That gets to be pretty crazy after a while. Anybody who's tried Worldwide English. All right, but what if I do want to hear everything? Well, that's what Digital Monitor, and sometimes called promiscuous mode, depends on the manufacturer and the CPS software, what they refer to it as. Most often now I see it as Digital Monitor. Digital Monitor says, forget the color code, forget the time slot. On this frequency, I just want to hear everything that comes out of the repeater on that frequency. That's what Digital Monitor does for you. So again, usually it can be assigned to a single key or button press, and you can turn your radio into a digital monitor. This is the way scanners work normally. If you have a scanner that does DMR, it's going to operate first and by default in digital monitor mode. I often hear ham say, hey, wow, private calls. Oh, this is what I've been looking for in ham radio. I want to do a private call to my friend and have nobody else able to hear it. So it's fully private over to the other station. Well, that's not quite how it works. Yes, you can make a private call to another station by just addressing the talk group, or excuse me, the contact of that station, that ham. And in fact, it will go off as a private call, but it's monitorable by anyone who's in, well, digital monitor or promiscuous mode. And in fact, private calls, they're of limited usefulness. So it's not exactly like you have a private line or secure communication with another ham. As you know, encryption's not permitted in the United States in ham radio. Similar ilk is, can I send text messages via DMR? The answer is yes. DMR does support text messages, and you'll find that in your menu settings that you can actually send a text. However, it's being restricted pretty heavily now. Brandmeister still supports it. I just learned the other day that the Seabridge networks are going to be turning off text messaging. I don't think they've done it yet, but it's coming later this year. So at this point, it's supported on some of the voice networks, but not all of them. And yeah, you can send them. You may have actually seen a text message come in. It'll come up on your display on your radio indicating you've received a text message. If somebody else sends one, it's possible to send a broadcast text message. And they have done that from time to time on the PA statewide talk group, because PA statewide, as you probably know, is intended as a calling group or a calling talk group. And if QSOs run more than 10 minutes on that, you might get a text message saying that you've approached or you're exceeding the 10-minute limit for QSOs on PA statewide. All right, now let's talk about R2D2, or for those of you who remember Max Headroom, and garbles and packet loss and digital blurching, sometimes I call it. And so you'll see it, you'll hear it. You'll hear dropouts, you'll hear various types of garbles in the voice. And I've given an example here from the Pi-Star dashboard. And you can see there's a column for packet loss and also a column for BER, or bit error rate. And that's a loss of digital bits over a given period of time. If that starts to exceed about 1 to 2%, you're at very high risk for having the other end, or whoever's listening to your transmission, being garbled up. Likewise, if it comes into you with a high error rate, bit error rate, you may be hearing garbles on that as well. The Pi-Star software monitors this if you happen to be near a computer. And you can see there were a couple stations here. Not only a high bit error rate, 2.1 is marginal, 5.2 is definitely out of the box, caused a loss of packets, half of them and about 3/4 of them in this one transmission from KC3, whomever, and I grayed out the call signs to protect the innocent. So, so what causes this? Well, a lot of things. It might be, and most often is, a weak signal into the DMR system, meaning a weak signal into the repeater. And as you probably well know, DMR is all or nothing. You can't just open the squelch and hear the other station. Once you drop off the cliff of unacceptable bit error rate or packet loss, the signal's either gone or badly garbled. So we're in garbled territory with these red and yellows that are in this indication. And here's one that's acceptable, like 0.6%. So if you have a 0.6% bit error rate, let's say, onto your hotspot, is it something to be worried about? No. And that is why they have this in green. It is possible to adjust your hotspot so that its receive frequency is offset a little bit. It's easier than adjusting your radio, but that's kind of beyond the scope of this webinar. But again, something with less than 1 to 2% bit error rate, don't worry about it, as long as you're getting clean copy. And again, go back and use the parrot. Check with the parrot, and if your audio plays back to you clearly on the parrot, then you're golden. Now, this is kind of a special slide here, and kind of explain how a better display is really going to help you with your DMR operation. What we have on the left is a popular but low-cost radio. Yes, I own one as well. And this is a real display on the left for a low-cost radio with a very limited display. Better than no display at all, but kind of limited. And then on the right-hand side is a more expensive radio. In this case, it was an Anytone with a lot more detail that comes out for the DMR operations. What I've done is there's an animation coming up here, and it's going to step through each of these items in the middle of the screen. And I'm going to start it shortly, but every time you see a green arrow that goes both ways, for example, the A radio green arrow will show, oh, yep, the A radio is on the Parrot for Salem Mountain, and the A radio over here is on the Northeast PA cluster. Then there's an equivalence between the two. But anytime that the green arrow goes only to the one radio, you can begin to see what's missing in the less expensive displays. So let's take a look and let it step through here a little bit. So there's the A radio, two radios, actually two receivers, and they actually switch between each other. And yeah, they both show us some relative signal strength. The transmit power level is kind of indicated, low, high, medium sometimes. GPS is of limited usefulness in DMR. Some radios offer it. But notice that the radio on the right shows the color code. The one on the left does not. Battery levels on both. The last call sign heard is displayed on the radio on the right. And thanks, Ken, for letting me use your call sign. We'll settle up after the presentation. Digital and analog modes, the channel number, the channel and talk group name, they usually do show those things to you. But now the zone name that you're in the radio, that's unique to the radio on the right. The time slot is only indicated on the radio on the right. Whether you're in repeater or talk around mode is only in the radio on the right. And the soft key labels. And it took me a while to understand soft keys years ago, but soft key is when you have the word, let's say menu here, then the green button does what that soft key is, or the zone changes by using the up and down arrows and so on. There are no soft key labels over here. You just have to know that the green button here on the left, that's the menu key. So think about that when you're thinking about acquiring a radio. The display can tell you an awful lot. And it's especially useful if you've just heard a call. Somebody says, they put their call out and say, yeah, this is W3XYZ listening. Okay, and you weren't looking at your radio and you go over and it's gone blank. Well, on the radio on the right, all I have to do is touch the volume control for a moment and I'll see, oh, that was Ken, WB2HJQ. He just called a couple minutes ago. I missed it, but no, I see he's the one who was looking for a call. You can't tell that at all on the radio on the left. So differences in displays can be kind of important. What are some other good operating practices? Again, use the Parrot. I can't say that enough. But when you're calling, announce what talk group you're on. So, and this is because your station listening may not be looking at a display, or they may be mobile. They might not have a display, or they may have a hotspot, which is monitoring several talk groups at the same time, and they have no idea where you came up. So if you say, KZ3MW, listening for a call. Okay, I look over at my radio. I don't really know for sure until I touch the radio, one of them anyway, where you made that call or how to respond to you. I have no idea. If I'm mobile and scanning, it's even worse. So you might run a call by starting out with something other than your call sign. And I know that's much contrary to popular wisdom, says, oh, announce your call. First of all, first thing out of your mouth should be your call sign. Not necessarily true with DMR. it's a good idea to just say something like, listening on PA statewide. This is KZ3MW, KZ3 Mike Whiskey Mobile on PA State, looking for a call. And finish up with your call rather than lead with it. That gives people a chance to adjust their hearing, look at their radio if they can, and understand that, oh gosh, that's Mark. I want to talk to him. He's on the NEPA cluster, or he's on PA State. And another kind of key rule, I mentioned it briefly earlier, once you've made contact on a wide area calling talk group, such as any of the statewide, PA, Maryland, New York, whatever, some of them are used more than others, but in general, they are all calling talk groups. Move off to a talking group for your QSO, such as PA TAC, which is 31421. These will be in your code plug, hopefully, TAC 312 through 318, etc. Those are the places where talking for extended periods is encouraged, but not on the statewide. The net. There's a lot of repeaters on most statewide talk groups, and they very often have a static setup of the statewide channel. It really ties up a lot of resources at the same time when you do that. All right, hotspots, and we'll get to repeaters in a moment, but what is a hotspot? Well, basically it's a low power radio interface, operates in simplex for your digital voice network, and not just DMR, by the way. And it's really intended for use for about a quarter-mile radius, but you can extend it with an external antenna. Typically, it's a really tiny box, and there's some examples at the bottom here. It uses your internet connection to reach other hotspots, repeaters, voice networks, etc. All of the digital voice modes, not just DMR, are supported in these hotspots. And that's true whether it's a Shark RF open spot or a Pi-Star device, whichever. All of the hotspots can monitor many talk groups at the same time, which can be good and bad. You don't even have to scan. If you set up, you can set up 3, 4, 8, 12 static talk groups, and whichever one makes it to the hotspot first via the internet, that's what you're going to hear on your radio. Typically, they operate in the 70 centimeter UHF band. Many of them are less than $100. Left to right, this is the original Shark RF open spot. This actually is a picture of my DV Mega Pi, or Raspberry Pi 3 DV Mega daughter board hotspot. There's the newer open spot too. And this is the sometimes called the Zoom spot, jumbo spot. These are the tiny sub $100 metal box jobs. And they're useful for traveling. I keep one in my suitcase. I put one in my car, which you'll see in a moment. Oh, here it is right here. So can I use a hotspot for DMR connection while I'm mobile? Yes, absolutely. It's pictured here. This is in the open armrest lid of my car. Right up here in this corner is that little metal box with the hotspot inside it. You can connect to the internet by turning on the Wi-Fi hotspot in your cell phone. And it uses the Pi-Star software, just like any other Raspberry Pi device. One of the things you want to watch is when you set up a mobile hotspot, don't use the same frequency as your home hotspot. If you put two hotspots on the same frequency and key them from one radio, the DMR networks, almost all of them, will recognize that as it's an unauthorized use kind of thing, because you're transmitting from two different devices onto the network at the same time, and you'll get a lockout. Fortunately, it only lasts about an hour, and then you'll get reset automatically. But if you want to avoid those automatic lockouts, don't set up your mobile hotspot, because you pull into the driveway, you finish a QSO, and oops, you're now keying up your other hotspot, which is inside the house, and both signals hit the network at the same time, and boop, next you'll hear, gosh, what's her name, Brunhilde, or the heavy English accent voice woman saying, what did she say? Lockout? No, can't remember now. Denied, something like that. And of course, in your code plug, you might want to create a mobile hotspot zone, because that's going to be a different set of frequencies than your home hotspot. And then this is just another view. It's kind of hard to see from the console, but this is my complete console. Again, the lid's open. This is from the driver's view. So the hotspot itself is upside down, and that's my CS800, which is the mobile radio that I'm using normally. This is an important thing, how to pick a frequency for your hotspot. So hotspots are low power. Do not use them in the satellite band. which a couple of those actually, 435 to 438 and 145.8 to 146 are the space bands. And repeater linking goes on in the 433 to 435 megahertz range. So you want to stay out of those ranges with a hotspot. Look at your Free Coordinators website, for example, ARCC, the Amateur Radio Coordinating Council. That's in Eastern PA anyway, and Southern New Jersey. They'll typically have a band plan and guidance regarding hotspots. If you live near another ham, within a mile or two, and you know that person's got DMR, don't use the same frequency for your hotspots. I found out the hard way on that. That can be very confusing, not only causing lockouts, but sometimes you'll hear transmissions coming in that you say, wait a minute, I never put Tri-State from New Jersey into my code plug. How come I'm hearing stuff on Tri-State? Just that's the kind of stuff that happens. So hotspots are supported by several of the digital voice networks, but not all of them. And I hear a lot of discussion. So even though you can support multiple DMR networks, such as Brandmeister, DMR Plus, TGIF, start with one first. Don't try to get off and get onto all three at the same time. You're going to do TGIF, you're going to do DMR Plus, set up Brandmeister, and none of them work. So get one of them going, and Brandmeister is probably the simplest to get started with. You do have to register. It's free registration. Get your hotspot set up there and put a hotspot password and an API or application programming interface key. There's explanations to do it on brandmeister.network. That'll help you get your hotspot on the air. Then, after you do the Brandmeister thing, you can move on and tackle the other networks should you want to try them. What are some of the frequencies? Now that I mentioned which ones don't use, here are ones that are eligible for use, at least in Eastern PA. In general, the 449.25 to 441.075 is designated as digital simplex, and that's per the ARCC in Eastern PA. And there's some example hotspot frequencies. There are two nationally recognized direct mode, as they call them in DMR, UHF simplex and VHF simplex. At UHF at 446.075 and 145.790. Those are intended for unit-to-unit communications without an intervening repeater. All right, we talked about hotspots. So what's some differences with repeaters? Probably most important to know is that the coverage design and the signal level needed to use DMR on a repeater is considerable in the sense that a commercial radio system in a warehouse or land mobile radio or public safety system, they have multiple transmitters usually, or extremely high power, very tall tower locations. And yes, you can use a handheld in a basement of a building. Ham repeaters are usually not built to that standard. And they're not built to commercial system coverage standards. So you have to be extremely cautious with a handheld radio, and especially not using a handheld radio in the car. So your HT or handy talkie handheld radio, yeah, they're great for use in your house if you've got a hotspot, or maybe you're lucky enough to live in a place where you have really good strong coverage from a repeater. Sure, go ahead and use your HT in the house, but it's really not suited for an HT from inside the house without an external antenna, unless you're within the strong loop coverage. And I call that S6 to S9, which is about a neg 100 dBm or better. How do you know? You can go to the PeerWatch page for any repeater or even Brandmeister, and you'll see what your signal level is into the repeater by call sign. It'll show you when you transmit. And if you're not hitting that S6 to S9, you're not in a reliable coverage thing. Mobile radios, typically will put out 40 watts to a vehicle-mounted antenna. That means outside the car. And with features that are actually designed for safer mobile operating. HTs require you to look at them a lot. And unless you're not in motion, they're kind of dangerous to operate in a vehicle. So you're better off with a mobile radio in a vehicle designed and purpose-built for mobile use. And this is true for analog FM repeaters. This is shouldn't be news, but it's especially true with DMR. Now, what's the difference between a static and a dynamic talk group? I've talked about them several times here. And they are available on both repeaters and hotspots. You can have a static or a dynamic on both of those facilities. They're selected by user activation. if it's a dynamic talk group. Sometimes statics also require user activation. You got to know the repeater and read the web page for the repeater, or repeaterbook.com, wherever the information is. But user activation means a push to talk, PTT, a key up. And that's how it activates any talk group. Actually, on a Brandmeister repeater can be brought up with a user activated key up. Many of the other repeaters, the Seabridge systems and so on, they'll have a static, but you still need to key up or kerchunk to bring up the talk group. On a repeater itself, those those static talk groups are determined by the system operator, not the user, on other types of repeaters. So again, you need to know how the repeater is connected to the worldwide DMR voice network. And as I noted before, there are multiple voice networks out there. So from a standpoint of repeaters and using them with statics or dynamics, know how they're connected. You can find that in the repeater's website, places like WR3irs.com, which is a network of repeaters around Pennsylvania, or repeaterbook.com. And in this category, what's a repeater cluster? That's a Brandmeister item. Actually, I think they exist in the Seabridge as well. It's just when a group of repeaters have gotten together and availed themselves of the same static talk group on the same time slot, so that when you're mobile, you can, or in a given region, they're typically regional. For example, we have the NEPA or Northeast PA cluster. That's on about half dozen repeaters in Eastern and Northeast PA. It's just an agreement to share a static talk group. So static means assigned and available full-time repeater or a hotspot. You can assign it with your control panel on your hotspot. There's not usually a key up required. If there's a transmission on what's called a static talk group, TG meaning talk group, that repeater or hotspot is going to retransmit the audio immediately. A dynamic talk group is activated by the user. The user keys up or push to talk per chunks the desired talk group, and it stays up for about 10 minutes if there's no activity. And if there's no activity, then it will drop from the repeater automatically, or even drops off your hotspot after 10 minutes. You'll see it go away if it's a dynamic. Another common question I see all the time, and let me check, speaking of time, be sure we're getting right near the end. Oh yeah, we're doing good. How do I talk to my buddy in Alaska or Hawaii or Southern California or Mississippi or whatever? How do you do this? Well, with a hotspot or a Brandmeister repeater, it's pretty straightforward. Pick a talk group, such as TAC 312, TAC 313, 314, etc. And in the case of what happened to me a few years ago when I was in Southern California, I had to look up the repeater listings and figure out, okay, I'm trying to talk to a friend back here in East PA. I'm on a repeater in California, and which talk groups do we have in common? Because in this case, it wasn't a Brandmeister repeater, and I had to use a static talk group. Fortunately, in time slot 2, they had some of the TAC, or TAC, stands for Talk Around Channel. They had a TAC 312 and 313. So I advised my ham buddy on the other end with the DB4 Mini, hey, key up and get yourself into TAC 313, and that's where we will talk, and it works. So you got to plan this out a little bit to determine what talk groups are on the repeater you're in and what your buddy's using. Now, if you're both on hotspots, it's a non-issue, go anywhere you want. It's only when you're trying to figure out you're traveling, you're on a repeater, you need to find a talk group that's common to both of you at the same time. And speaking of talk groups, and this listing, by the way, let me say the last line first. They're all listed on padmr.net. padmr.net is a website we set up to support the Tuesday night Pennsylvania Digital Radio Net. And all of these above are listed there, but to kind of go through them quickly, these are the primary talk groups in Pennsylvania. 31420 is kind of a special use one. That's the Pennsylvania Emergency Management Agency Auxiliary Communication Service, Emergency Communications. And PEMA, I've only ever heard it turned on or activated once in the last 3 years. There might have been some others, but they don't bring it up very often. It's usually pretty quiet, but useful if you're ARES to know that that's out there. Statewide calling, that's the one most of you are familiar with, 3142. And again, make your initial call there, but then please QSY to another talk group. Tuesday at 8 p.m., we have been given the latitude of running the statewide check-in net there every Tuesday night at 8 p.m. That's many of you check in, and you'll hear that on at 8 o'clock. 31421 is the Pennsylvania Talk Around channel, and that is very often where people go when they move from the statewide calling talk group. They go to PA TAC. 31422 is Western PA, and they do have a net on that, 7:30 on Wednesday nights, Western PA. 31423, yes, it actually exists. It's a Central PA talk group. I don't know of a net on that currently. Always watching to see if there is one. 31424, as I mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, is Northeast PA, or the NEPA cluster, and we run a net on that one every Wednesday at 1 p.m., the NEPA net. 31425 is actually a Pennsylvania facility, but it's used by hams all over the world. It's a digital cross mode system. Jeff, WA3PNY, and others have built that to handle, you can go into that, if you go into the appropriate D-star reflector, it will come out on 31425 in DMR, and it comes out on NXDN, and it also comes out on P25, I believe. So that's kind of like a digital tower of Babel. You go in on one protocol and it retransmits on the internet, not via RF, but on the internet, using all those other protocols that I just mentioned. A fairly new talk group is 31426, and that's the East PA. And tomorrow night, as George will be quick to tell you, there's going to be the first ever East PA net held at 7:30 p.m. on 31426. You might want to make a note of that. And then there's also a Southeast PA talk group, 314259. I do not know of a net on that, but would be interested. If anybody cares to email on that, I'll note it down and we'll put it on our padmr.net page for the talk groups. So I mentioned, where can you get reliable information about DMR and how to proceed with a lot of different questions that come up commonly. You've seen a couple citations I've made here. John, K3NXU, he's a frequent check-in on the Tuesday night net, the DMR. One runs a wonderful website, and it's called the MICLOR, Radio Information and Support Site. It's at miclor.com. There's a ton of useful DMR information there. Also, another one that I just recently became familiar with is a DMR site, pardon me, that's also general amateur radio, but he has about a page and a half of DMR links and information, and that's W2XQ, and there's the full URL for that. And I'll come back to this page here in a moment. So you don't have to memorize all these. You can pull them down or copy them. Again, back to the MICLOR site, a digital mobile radio basic tutorial, putting the pieces together, very useful stuff, a lot more detail about what you need to get started. And also Code Plug 101 is another presentation on the MICLOR site. That one actually goes into the detail, step by step. Here's what you need to do to create or modify a code plug. And again, I recommend start with another code plug that somebody's given you or you have downloaded. And yes, he does have code plugs for download on the MICLOR site. And then, of course, I mentioned in passing PA Digital Radio, which is at the padmr.net website. And that one we created and use it to support our operations on Tuesday night with the PA DMR net. So it's da-da-da-da-da, SK. And that's the end of the formal presentation for it here. And as I noted, we're going to take questions. And I am going to go back a slide because I know some of you wanted the information there. I'll leave that up while we get into questions. And George, I'll let you moderate the question section.
Okay, anyone that has any questions, Mark gave us a real good presentation and a lot of information in there. Maybe even too much to absorb for those of us that are raw beginners.
It went fast.
I did clear up. I've always had a problem with static and dynamic groups. I could never quite get that right. I think I've got a handle on it now.
Oh, good.
And I know what I have to do. I've got to get into my my hotspot and set up the static groups that I
Yep.
want to be able to hear all the time, and I'll probably do that later on this evening. And we would like anyone. We've got 658 people still here. We had
Wow.
60 checked in. You can raise your hand, but I probably won't find you. So if you have a question, the best thing to do would be go ahead and unmute your microphone. You can unmute yourself, ask your question, and when Mark answers it, please mute back up again so that we're not talking all over each other or interfering. And I probably should turn my camera on because I see I have my EPA logo
Yeah.
up. And now I got to sit up straight instead of laying down slouching in my chair. So anyone
And
with
put
a
your glass of
question,
wine down, right?
right, get rid of the beer,
Yeah.
and
Mark.
we'll continue from here.
Mark.
All
Hey,
right.
when you call, please identify yourself so we know who you are and so
I can
Mark
see.
knows who he's talking
Yeah,
to.
I see Joe there. And
Hi,
Joe.
this is Joe, N2SIU.
Yeah.
Will those PowerPoints be available?
And I'm going to let George answer that because I think the answer is yes. So,
Well, anyone that presents information and prepares a slideshow, it's implied that it's copyrighted by them. So if Mark wants to release it, I will make it available on our epa-arrl.org website. But it is copyrighted material. If you're going to be reusing it, ask Mark before you reuse it because it's his material. Even though the copyright symbol didn't show up anywhere, it is implied that it is copyrighted.
yeah, I would probably add to wherever it gets posted, George, that if it's going to be reused in whole, not in part, but in whole for presentation to an amateur group or anything that's amateur radio related, then I'd say, yeah, that's fine to use it in its entirety. So, yeah.
Mark, this is KB3PCY.
Hey, Martin, you asked the other day. I'm glad to see you were here because you're wanting a confirmation. So,
Well,
thanks for running the.
Excellent presentation, Mark, and I
Yeah,
think it touched just at the right level, at least for me. But I had one question.
Yeah.
Talk around.
Yes.
Reference to talk around. Maybe you said this, but could you just briefly expand on what that means?
Oh yeah, it's a very pertinent question, and thanks for asking, so I can expand on it. A lot of people see that TAC channel and they think, oh, that's left over from the public safety radio, the police departments, when they have a tactical operation. That means it's the tactical channel, or the fire department uses it as fireground, and they call it the fireground or TAC channel for local operations that don't go through the repeater. But they're used for unit to unit. Well, yeah, that's the commercial and public safety use of it. That's not actually what it means on the ham side. Talk, and it did in commercial as well. It means talk around channel. The idea being that it doesn't go through the repeater. It's a simplex channel. Typically, though, the way it's set up commercially or in the mobile radio systems for public safety, all units will switch to the repeater's output frequency and operate on the output frequency without going through the dispatcher. Or they'll go to a talk around channel where there's no repeater, sometimes a repeater, but it'll all be away from the dispatcher so they can conduct on-scene or on-site operations. The thing that gets confusing is when you're building code plugs in DMR, you will see a check mark sometimes that'll say, I want this channel to be a talk around channel. Well, unfortunately, it doesn't do the good ham thing for that. What we would like it to do as hams, when we hit talk around, actually ICOM does this. They have a thing called XFC, which is a transfer, and it inverts the repeater input and output, which is perfect because what you want to do typically is you want to hear if you're within simplex range of another station, you want to listen on the input. Unfortunately, the DMR code plug stuff, what they do typically, if you check something as a talk around channel, all it does is it brings the repeater input channel up to the output frequency. So you're just simplex on the repeater's output. It doesn't help a lot, but the terminology stuck. So when they designated in the DMR world, TAC 310, TAC 311, TAC 312, the meaning was, look, these are conversation channels that are to be used for longer winded QSO kind of things. but it was a carryover from the public safety side, and they meant TAC, talk around.
Okay, so I don't need to designate the TAC channels in my code plug as talk around.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, you're better off not doing that. And I found that out the hard way some time ago, because I said, oh yeah, I'd like to have on my HT, when I select talk around, I want to have it flip the repeater input and output. Well, that's not what it does. It turns off the input frequency and brings you up. And then you key up and realize, wait a minute, yesterday I could hit the repeater, now I can't. I'm transmitting and nothing's happening. I finally went back on my code plug and I looked and said, oh wait, talk around channel, the way that's working, when I check this thing, it cuts out my repeater input and it disables the repeater. So in general, on ham use, don't use talk around channel. Avoid it. But you can use the TAC channels, the TAC 310, TAC 311, TAC. Those are encouraged. It's just they picked a bad name in a way, because if you really know the history of what talk around's about, it might be confusing. So, great question. Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, before we move on to the next question, there's one thing I would like to add. I don't know how many of you, I know some people that signed up for this webinar told me they wanted to just learn what DMR was, and they weren't into it yet.
Yeah.
You can get a wide range of prices on the equipment, as Mark has mentioned. Baofeng and some of the others have $50 radios that will get you on. But I think because of the extremely steep learning curve that I encountered and some of you others have run into for DMR, and the different steps involved in programming, you're liable to be frustrated with one of the El Cheapos.
Especially with a tiny little 2 or 3 line display like I showed on the screen. That's can be
and the
makes it even harder.
CPSs are not always compatible or intuitive either. It doesn't do what you think it does. Right now, a ham radio outlet has a real good deal going on for the Alignco DG MD5 radio, which is that's the one I have. So I'm kind of prejudiced. It was the first one I bought, and I used it. I did buy an Anytone mobile rig with 60-watt output for my car, but I still use it on a hotspot out in the car. But Ham Radio Outlet has $130 for one, and that I think is a great price for a DMR radio that also has analog capability.
I've heard a lot of good reports. A lot of good reports in that radio, by the way, too.
Yeah, for $150, you can get one that has the GPS in it. I've got one that has a GPS. So far, I've never had a call to use it. I don't know what you really want a GPS for, but I was told when I first got started not to use it, because if you're on some repeaters, it creates havoc on the repeater. So turn the GPS off, and I've never turned it on.
Yeah. Some of the voice networks have disabled it as well. Things might change in the future, but at the present time, GPS is not really being used. The idea was, oh gosh, we can use it in the APRS, Automatic Position Reporting System, APRS packet system, and the radio, you turn on GPS and you can have it send out APRS packets for location. Yeah, it'll do that. It's probably better done though on the analog side of things with the APRS packet networks and digipeaters rather than on DMR. And you're finding that because of what you just said, George, a lot of the repeaters and voice networks are restricting that type of messaging.
Steve, N6IQA.
Hiya, Steve. Thanks for being here.
Oh, my pleasure. Yeah, I remember when I first got my license, I had one of those old, back in the 80s, a Yaesu that had 10 channels on it. And now it seems like the options of where to jump to or how to jump to different frequencies has expanded immensely. I mean, this is like beyond what I have in my my first generation ICOM D-Star.
Yep.
What's a good way to, start off small and then expand your capability as to how you can use your radio?
Yeah, that's a very appropriate question for this seminar. My thought would be, because it boils down to this, and I've had code plugs handed to me, and a couple of them had every single talk group in North America in there, and every single ham DMR contact in North America, the world actually. He loaded it right up. He said, well, the radio's got the capacity, why just put it in there? It was total confusion. I took the code plug, said, look, what do I do day to day? What do I do the most? Well, mostly I'm interested in Pennsylvania. So my thought on this is I gave the list of the PA talk groups. That's a great place to start. Create a zone. You can call it your PA zone or your home zone, whatever you might want, and ensure that you have in that the commonly used talk groups that I listed in Pennsylvania. It's a great place to start. And if you have a hotspot or contemplating getting one, you may want to set your hotspot to monitor as a static, and you can see my hotspot screen is behind me here. I don't know if yeah, but that's I set up the statics of PA statewide. I listen to that all the time. 31424 Northeast PA, and I listen to East PA 31426. So depending on your geography, you may set them a little differently, but that's kind of the basics to begin with. And that'll kind of lead into other branches. Now there are specialized with like 1,400 talk groups available. You know that there are some very specialized talk groups. I mean, one of the folks that is in our club that I work with is a deacon in the Catholic Church, and he said, "Mark, can you get me ZNet onto my code plug?" I said, "Sure, we'll set it up, but tell me, what is ZNet?" And it turns out it's a church for priests and, a talk group for priests and deacons in the Catholic Church. So, I mean, talk about specialized interests. They're out there. And those are the kind of things you may seek out and look at later. But in general, a good place to start, the PA talk groups, the ones that I listed before. Oh, and another thing is, you see how these thousands of channels and hundreds of channel capabilities or memory that'll hold up to 1,200 channels, and you're wondering, why do I need all of that? Well, when you're programming DMR, don't forget that if you have a single repeater and you decide on that repeater you want to use 6 talk groups, you need to put that repeater frequency pair in there 6 different times. So once for PA state, once for PA TAC, again for PA Northeast PA, another one for East PA, one for Central PA, whatever you're setting up, you're going to repeat the same frequency pair 6 times. So the need for additional channel capacity in the radios is pretty obvious compared to the days when you mentioned your Yaesu, and I had a Drake TR-22 little, I think it was a 12-channel crystal control rig. Those days, that was good for then in FM analog, but boy, with DMR, the way it's programmed, you do need that capacity. But whether you fill it all up in the beginning, that can be confusing. So my thought would be stay with the PA talk groups to start.
And then as you expand, you have to memorize all that stuff too, right?
Kind of, unless you have one of the radios with a nicer display. And then you can use the display to remind you, oh, that's right. I have an Iowa talk group here or Missouri talk group because that's, I've got a couple different friends I talk to back in those states, and I do want to be able to go to their local repeaters. So you set those up, and I'm using that example because Robert K0PB, who's our mainstay net control, he's up there. I can see him on the screen. He does talk to folks back home once in a while in the middle of the country where he's from. So he's got a couple special talk groups in there. But yeah, you can expand from there. Absolutely. Yep.
There you are, Robert. I know what you look like now. You can't hide from me when you're net control anymore. I didn't notice you on there before. Yep. One thing that hasn't been mentioned that pet peeve of mine, again, I'm a newbie. I've been on DMR for maybe 6 months now, which according to some people makes me an expert. I've been on a day longer than you. But talking too quickly, when you key your microphone, it keys up a lot of machines down the line through the internet and through the local network. Mm-hmm. So I'm trying to learn to make it a habit of hitting the push to talk,
pause,
counting to 3, and then starting to talk.
Mm-hmm.
Because I hear a lot of times people, I monitor a lot of the 31426 East PA, and I hear the end of a call sign and I have no idea who it was to go back to them. Yep. I can look on my display and see who it was, but a lot of times that's not convenient.
It's not convenient, yeah.
Count to 3 and then start to talk.
Yeah, and lead with something other than your call, as I said.
Right, I didn't think of that before, but that's a great idea, and I'll start trying to do that.
Yeah.
Also, when you go to answer somebody, it's the same thing. Yep. I've got a bad habit of doing that. Somebody asks me a question and I jump right in and answer it. and the first half of my transmission's cut off.
Yep.
So you remember, there is a delay on DMR.
Yeah.
Mark, I have a question. Steve in Philadelphia, KC3AZT.
All right. Oh, nice. I'm looking at I love your shack. Is that a live picture in the back there, or is that just
Yeah,
oh,
that's the real deal, man.
good mic, Steve 104s and stuff anyway.
Yeah, that's a D104 I won at an online auction.
Yeah.
And including I picked up a nice old school Turner Plus 2, which is now hooked up to my ICOM. And I'll tell you, the thing sounds awesome, man. Mark, question.
Yeah.
Make it quick and short. I believe that I have a Zoom spot, okay?
Yeah.
Now, if I understand correctly, isn't the hotspot or the Zoom spot supposed to identify myself, being I'm the control operator?
Mm-hmm.
How does it do that? Do I need to program that to do that? Or?
Yeah. Well, here's what happens, and it's another thing, a great thing to bring up in this session. Thanks. The couple things about it. Well, when you program your Pi-Star software, which is what all the Zoom spots and the Apple spots and Orange spots and Jumbo spots and all the other things, the names they go by, they all run on Pi-Star, which is out of the UK. Can't think of his call sign now. It's not Joe Taylor, it's the other Taylor. But you do have to put in there, both in the hotspot, your DMR ID, and they ask you if you're going to put a 01 after it if it's your main hotspot, because some people run additional hotspots. So you'd put your DMR ID and then put 02 for your second hotspot, whatever. And also you're registered, well, if you're on the voice network, you're registered with Brandmeister. So yes, when you key up, that DMR ID is transmitted, that number. So mine, 314-2358, it goes out, and that's what causes either the contact number to appear in the radio display or the call sign if the radio is loaded with the call sign databases for some of the calls. Mm-hmm. Interesting thing that happens with it, though, it's not a legal ID. D-Star and Yaesu, System Fusion, they both send your amateur radio call sign with every packet that gets transmitted. Mm-hmm. So that's a legal ID. In the FCC's eyes, if you're sending your call sign digitally, then you've ID'd properly. Because people ask questions, say, gee, if I'm using DMR, there's all the call signs are right there. Why do I even need to announce my call sign or speak it?
Yeah, I mean, I'm talking about the Zoom spot itself transmitting.
Right. Yeah, it transmits your DMR ID, but it doesn't transmit your call sign. So,
all right, as long as I'm good with the FCC, that's all I'm worried about.
Oh yeah, you'll be fine. And that's why you'll see if you set up a new code plug or take one that doesn't have any DMR IDs or contacts in it, all you're going to see on your radio's display is the DMR ID number. You won't see the guy's call sign, location, or any other nice details that I showed on that slide a while ago. With some of the radio displays have very elaborate display. It's really nice because you'll see, oh, this is W3XYZ in Williamsport. And I can see he came in on time slot 2 on this particular talk group, and you know exactly what's going on instead of just, getting a row of numbers.
Right.
But it's part of its combination of setting up your hotspot if you have one, and also mainly the code plug, loading it up with DMR contacts. So
I'm safe, in other words.
Oh yeah, you're okay though. Yeah, it's just, remember, it's not a legal ID. You still have to say your call sign on the air.
Well, yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah.
All right, thank you, Mark. It was a great presentation. Thank you very much.
Oh, thanks.
Thank you, Mark. This is Tom, AF4NC.
Hiya, Tom. We haven't talked since we got you running with.
Yeah, you got me running, and great presentation, and I had to get up a couple of times. My wife is out, and I got a house full of cats, and there was a little cat fight I had to break up earlier. But great presentation. I enjoyed it. I learned a lot, and looking forward to getting the mobile rig going next.
Oh yeah, yep. You definitely want to do that, especially in Pennsylvania, or as they say, the endless mountains of Pennsylvania, where DMR signals just suddenly disappear. You were in the repeater one moment, the next you're not.
Yeah, my radio has a scan feature on it, which allows me to seek whichever one I can hit But up here in the boonies where I am, I've only got one repeater I can hit almost any time. And if I lose that one, I'm gone. So I do
Yep.
run a mobile hotspot, and I found that's really the way to go.
Yeah.
I don't have to worry about repeaters or talk groups. Everything is the same every time I turn my radio on.
Yep.
Anybody else? Mark couldn't have answered everybody's questions because DMR covers
Oh.
so much. It took me a while to learn what zones were. I programmed my cone plug and nothing worked until somebody told me you have to use zones.
Yeah, got to put every talk group in a zone. Well, actually, this is good because we can look at other. You'll get questions, I'm sure, and I can at kz3mw@arrl.net. And if we're going to do another session at some point, it'll help drive the content of what our next thing is. And I'm sure you'll disseminate information about where this recording can be found at some future date, right, George?
Yes, I will. I'll
Okay.
send out a section-wide announcement, and I'll also put it on the EPA blog. Let everybody know what it is. It'll be on our website. The recording I might put up on YouTube, but I'll put it where you can find it. It'll be in my area on YouTube, so you can access it. Make sure everybody knows. I'll make it as simple as possible to get to. If you have questions, email me. You can also call me. I keep telling everybody my phone number, my address, and my email are all on page 16 of QST. And unlike some of the previous net or section managers, I'm glad to hear from anybody at any time about any question you may have. If I don't know the answer, I do know where to get it. Mark's my DMR go-to guy, so I can always call on Mark if you have a DMR question. We've got two of us that I know of that are here tonight are on staff. Mark is one of my assistant section managers. Tom, AF4NC, is another assistant section manager. You can contact any of us, and we'll be glad to help you out any way we can. If you hit them with something they don't know, they know how to get a hold of me. And I can't emphasize enough, I am available. I won't say 24 hours a day, but
You don't leave a radio on
if you
beside the
need
bed?
me, you may have to leave a voicemail if you try a 24-hour a day.
PA statewide on your HT at the nightstand, right?
Well, I don't think so.
No.
PA statewide drives me nuts some days, and definitely worldwide drives me crazy.
Oh, yeah.
I hate going into worldwide. It stays static forever. I can't get rid of it.
Yeah.
Anyhow, we're available. Any other questions, please?
AB3X has a question.
Go ahead, Ed.
Out of necessity, I had to buy a new rig. So I opted for a dual band, and it was a Yaesu, and I said, oh boy, it's got digital. And now you tell me it's only compatible with Yaesu?
Barefoot, yes, but you can, if you get a hotspot, you can turn on, in fact, it's in my background screen up here someplace if I point to it. There's modes that will translate YSF, Yaesu System Fusion, to DMR. And it will handle the transcoding right inside the hotspot. And it's that one's fairly easy to set up. It's one of the easier cross modes you can set up in a hotspot. So you'll go to a specific Yaesu Fusion room that you create. There's some guidance on that. But it will pop out. You can select a talk group that it's going to come out on, and you can actually use your Yaesu radio to access DMR via hotspot.
Oh, thanks. When I
All
get
hope is not lost. Yeah.
when I get a little smarter, I'll try that. Thanks.
Mark, I have one of these radios that has Yaesu Fusion on it too, which I've never used. Can I turn Yaesu Fusion on my hotspot as well as DMR?
Yes, you can turn them both on at once. And what it will do is kind of like a scanner. It'll spend a little time dwelling on each of the channels. It'll stay, you set the time that it spends on each of the modes. It'll spend some time on YSF and switch to DMR. Yeah, I did the same thing for a while with D-Star. I have a D-Star radio, and I used it to access DMR.
I've got one of those. I got so many HTs, I don't know what I got anymore.
Yeah.
Hotspot will solve that problem for you, though. Yep.
Okay, good to
Hey.
know.
George?
Yes.
K0 Papa Bravo. Hey, good to see you, man.
Yeah,
Very
hi,
good to
Robert.
see you. Yeah.
This is a good thing we've got going here. And Mark did a great job. You know, I've got the same situation that you have there. I can hardly see any repeaters anywhere with my radios. So it's a hot spot for me right now. Maybe I'll try it in the vehicle too sometime. I've got a CS800 here.
The Forkston repeater is 14 miles away. And if I go out on my back deck with the HT, I can hit it. But I can get Northeast PA, and that I think that's the only talk group they have that's useful to me is the NEPA cluster.
Yeah.
And other than that, there's nothing on there that I want to use. So shortly after I got into it, about a week after I found out I could only hit Forkston from certain locations all through my area, well, WT, or WN3 LIF, who's SK, enlightened me to what a hotspot was. And I went out and got one, and he and I worked together and got me set up on my first hotspot. And I love them. They're great. I've got two. I've got one now that runs off a power pack. And when I go out in the mobile, I turn my iPhone on, turn the hotspot on my iPhone on, and then boot up my hotspot from my radio. And I'm in business. Everything is the same. I've got two different code plugs, one for the mobile, one for the home. And I just switched to the mobile code plug because the frequency's different. I found out, like Mark did, I don't want to have the same frequency in and out on my two hotspots.
Yeah.
I learned the hard way.
Yeah.
I've been through the school of hard knocks. Before I found people that knew what they were doing, I really stumbled.
Hey, well, good to meet you, George.
And nice meeting you, Robert.
Yeah, good to
Anytime
put
you
a
need me,
face
call
with
me.
the call. All right, very good.
Yeah, I'm
7-3,
available.
my friend.
Just give me a call. I'm glad to talk to people.
Thank you, George. 7-3 to you. Hey,
73,
Mark,
Bob.
good job, Mark.
Thanks.
Yeah, Mark, you've done a fantastic job. You covered a lot more than I thought you were going to.
Well, it took a little longer, but we're here.
Oh, that's
so.
okay.
George,
We still have 42 people here out of the 60 we started with.
Yeah,
So
good.
people were interested. Go ahead,
George?
Joe.
Yeah. Hey, one just housekeeping thing. The last email I got with the link for the Zoom and all
Uh-huh.
didn't have the time of the event.
Yeah, I know. Somebody pointed that out to me as soon as I sent it out, and I looked at it and it got cut off. So I had to
Right.
send out a second email. I hope you got that one that had the time on it. And I'm really sorry about that. That's an error in proofreading. I used to be an editor for a magazine, and I'm the worst at proofreading my own material that has ever existed. I'm the reason they hired 2 secretaries to keep track of what I wrote.
I just checked with my son if he was part of this, and he said, "Dad, you didn't send me the time
Yeah.
when it started."
Yeah, I'm really sorry. I got to apologize to everybody about that because you all got the same email with no time on it. And I'm really, really sorry. That's embarrassing. But if you stick with me long enough, you'll see that happens to me a lot. I don't do it on purpose, but I do manage to screw up with regularity.
No problem. No problem. You're a good man.
I do the best I can, and I'm really trying to be useful to you folks. I really want to be a good section manager for you. I want to represent you. I want to do things that you like. These webinars are an extension of that. I think it's something that adds value to everybody in the section. So I'm really interested. If you have an idea for something that we are not doing, the section has never done before, or the section did in the past and is not doing now, please let me know. I want to be responsive. I don't make decisions on my own. Tom Mills can tell you I bug him a lot. I'll call him with some really stupid ideas that he has to talk me down from occasionally. But, you know, I do try, and I am interested in doing as much as I can for everybody in the section. And whatever you want to do, please let me know.
I've got a question for Mark.
Yeah, go ahead, Mike. Mick.
Yeah, it's Mick, N30JP, Western PA. Well, my question is, I have a Raspberry Pi that I use, you know, in my home. And if I want to use that in the vehicle, I'll probably have to use my cell phone as a hotspot. And I'll probably incur some data cost. If I just purchase a hotspot, is there additional cost for the data being used?
what you say purchase a hotspot, you mean purchase like from Verizon, one of the Wi-Fi hotspot boxes?
No,
No,
like a Shark. One of
oh,
the
Shark.
Yes.
Well, no, there's not an additional cost unless you run over your data plan. But I'm finding that's pretty rare. I haven't heard anybody doing that. The voice stream data is it's like 6 to 8 kilobit a second, and it's pretty low. So
Yes.
typically, you have a 10 gigabyte plan or something along those lines. You're not even going to notice the difference when you're running a hotspot mobile, for example.
All right, so that also has a plan, same as like a cell phone.
Yeah, Mick, the plan I'm on, I have unlimited data, but I monitored it for a while when I started off running this just to see how much data I was actually shooting down after I put the hotspot on, and it's negligible.
Yeah, small.
You'd have to talk a lot. Thank you.
A friend of mine from West PA is also here, Sue, KA3JKS. Are you still around, Sue? Yeah, maybe she checked out already. But
I guess we're a little over time here, but yeah.
Yeah, we're a little after 9, but people, if you have questions, please ask. We got Mark here.
I can see she's still in the participant list, though. I just scrolled down and see. Yeah. Oh, just one thing, too, about mobile hotspots, kind of useful. It's a really good idea to be sure, keep your firmware and the software revision for the Pi-Star stuff up to date. They've made a lot of changes since the 3.1 version, probably over the last 3 to 4 months, that were targeted at the Wi-Fi parts. One of the problems I always had with my mobile hotspot for a long time was it would disconnect from the Wi-Fi hotspot on my phone. The later versions of the software have alleviated a lot of that behavior, so it stays connected more reliably. So. All right, I think I'm out of time here. You probably need to stop the recording as well there, George. You're looking for the buttons now.
Yeah, let me hit the button and we'll stop the recording.